an economic giant but a political dwarf. But in recent weeks, the country has taken a leap to the front line of efforts to contain the Ukraine crisis. This partly thanks to the Russian-speaking Chancellor Angela Merkel's phone conversations with Vladimir Putin. But 25 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, many ordinary Germans are still reluctant to endorse their country's new role. For some, it brings back too many reminders of the Cold War. Anne Maillet and Jessica Saltz report.
The ritual is always the same. When German army reserves come together, such as here in Königsbrunn in southern Germany, the pacifist movements are already waiting for them. This year they are more concerned than ever because of the crisis in the Ukraine.
This is typical of German foreign policy, this will to expand its sphere of influence, to have leverage on the course of events in Ukraine, but this only ends up reinforcing the conflict.
Of course, Putin is not a good person, but all that Germany is currently doing is provoking him to do much worse.
Because of its geographical proximity and history, Germany is taking charge in attempts to tackle the Ukrainian crisis. This break with tradition is regarded with distrust, especially since there are talks about increasing the German military presence on Eastern European borders.
Our defense minister, Mrs. von der Leyen, announced that she plans to send more of the army abroad. It's a militarization of foreign policy, and Germany is really the last country that can afford these kind of things.
But the tone is different among the German army reserves. Here they are convinced that Berlin should get more involved, especially in Eastern Europe.
We must show solidarity and explain to the German public that our security also depends on the safety of our eastern neighbors. The responsibility of politicians is to make sure people understand that we may be forced to use stronger sanctions against Russia in response to violations of international law.
A message that is still met with resistance. 25 years after the fall of the wall, many Germans fear a new Cold War. Economic ties with Moscow are very strong. The majority is opposed to punitive sanctions against Russia. There's also been hesitation within the government. While it threatens sanctions, it still wants to keep dialogue open. The Foreign Minister, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, has visited the Ukraine several times. Berlin has yet to take a firm stance, an attitude that has surprised the Ukrainian community in Germany. Alexandra from the Euromaidan collective in Berlin hoped for more commitment from her newfound home.
German policy has changed. They understood many things, but on the other hand, it's clear that Germany has many economic interests to defend in Russia, and it doesn't know what to do, if only in terms of its dependence on Russian gas. I personally would like to see Germany be more consistent.
On this issue, Berlin indeed has a lot to lose economically. 6,000 German companies operate in Russia, generating an annual turnover of around 40 billion euros. But even if the new German foreign policy looks set to make sacrifices, according to this expert in German-Russian relations, it's not in Berlin's interest to do so alone.
Germany must assume more responsibility and become aware that it cannot be a global economic player while practicing a foreign policy popular in the 19th century. That's no longer possible. But this also implies a learning process, which will happen within European countries, especially with France.
But Germans still need convincing. 77% of them currently oppose the strengthening of NATO troops on the eastern border of the European Union. But this is exactly what Berlin intends to do, by sending 6 Eurofighters to the Baltics.
OK, let's get you a check now on the latest sports news, including plenty of action in the Champions League.